Russia says it needs more clarity before responding to the United States' new deadline to reach a ceasefire in Ukraine. Hello, I'm Anton. This is The Heat. The Kremlin says it has taken note of U.S. President Donald Trump's statements regarding the conflict in Ukraine, but needs more time to analyze the full meaning. During a meeting on Monday with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, President Trump announced the United States will sell weapons to the NATO alliance to help Ukraine defend itself. Trump also said he was disappointed in Russian President Vladimir Putin and said the U.S. would issue severe tariffs on Moscow in 50 days unless a ceasefire deal is reached. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, had this to say in response.
We want to understand what is behind the statement on 50 days. It used to be 24 hours and it was 100 days. We've all been through this, and we really want to know what motivates the President of the United States.
Both Moscow and Kyiv are reporting damage and injuries from the latest drone and missile strikes on Tuesday. Russia says more than a dozen people were hurt when a residential building was hit in the Russian city of Voronezh. Ukraine reports at least 5 people were killed and more than 50 people injured in Russian strikes across the country. For more on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Munich is Marina Miron. She's a postdoctoral researcher with the War Studies Department at King's College London. And from Kyiv, we're joined by Peter Zalmayev. He is director of the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Peter, so President Trump has had a change of heart, a change of mind. He was reluctant in the past to supply weapons to Ukraine. Now that has changed. There will be new weapons going to Ukraine, including these Patriot missiles as well. There's a bit of a difference in the way the weapons will be supplied. They will not be given directly to Ukraine. They will be given to Ukraine's European allies who will pay for them, and then they will be shipped to Ukraine. And President Trump is touting the commercial aspects of this deal. Insofar as his change of mind, here in Washington, the political newspaper Axios refers to the president's change as seismic. The New York Times, which reflects establishment opinion here in Washington, says it's dramatic. So how do you see it?
I'm not sure if it's all that dramatic. Obviously, we've seen with Donald Trump that as there are as many as there are days in his presidency, we've seen that many turnarounds on a dime, and obviously the constantly shifting deadlines for the Russians to act. You have 2 weeks, then another 2 weeks, and now we're talking about 50 days. With everything that you just mentioned, yes, the Patriot missiles, then we have this agreement with NATO, and then countries will be drawing down their stocks of Patriots, and America will be replenishing them later. It's still to be elaborated, but at the end of the day, I mean, what are those 50 days for? I mean, are those is that period an encouragement to Putin to continue bombing Ukrainian cities and completely ignore Donald Trump's demands? I mean, what are those 50 days for? Then you have to also consider the Senate's bill that's been languishing in the Senate, and it has a bipartisan support of 85 senators, both Republican and Democrat, and that's been sort of shelved for right now. I mean, the senators are saying that we defer to the president on that. So a lot is still very unclear. A lot can change. And like, for example, we were talking about the Patriot missiles. Are we talking about batteries? Yeah. Or are we talking about launch pads? There's a huge difference. America has a total of 60 such batteries, and the world has 180. It's very, very unlikely that he talked about batteries per se. And even if he did, will take years for Ukraine to get that.
Marina, good to see you. Welcome to the show. Looking at these weapons transfers, how much of a game changer will these new arms shipments be? And one of the reasons I ask that is because during the negotiations, President Trump had a telephone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine, and during that telephone call, he asked President Zelensky about striking targets deep inside Russia, including Moscow, the capital. So are we going to see a radical escalation in the conflict?
Hello and good to be here. Well, first of all, I agree with Peter. It has to be clarified 17 of exactly what is Ukraine getting. Are we talking about Patriot systems? Are we talking about Patriot batteries? If we're talking systems, then it will make 3 batteries more or less, 3 to 4 batteries. And so in terms of game changers, if we look at the history of warfare, with an exception of the use of atomic bomb by the United States, I don't think that any technology has dramatically shifted the course of war. Technology is important. However, it's not decisive or rarely decisive when it comes to reaching the political and strategic ends. And therefore, given the fact that there are so many question marks, how many systems will Ukraine get? How many batteries? How many interceptors? Then the other question is, let's assume for a moment that Ukraine will get these systems. Who is going to operate them? Because you need people capable of operating these systems, and you need Ukrainians to be able to speak English or to read English in order to be taught on how to use these systems. So that is another question. Therefore, I don't think that we're going to see, even if Ukraine received them today, that we're going to see a dramatic shift when it comes to the dynamics on the battlefield. And again, what Ukraine needs is an echeloned air defense, which might be very difficult to construct given the lack of different air defense systems, and specifically with Patriot, it's only long range, designed for intercepting ballistic missiles. What about the other layers, short to medium range? So there are issues with that. So there is no game changer, and I don't believe in game changers. It can create a tactical or operational effect if you introduce a new weaponry, but it is not long lived until the other side adapts.
Peter, Marina's talking there about the introduction of new weapons, the introduction of new technology, and whether that could or could not change the military posture on the ground. I mean, would it be fair to say at this point that the point of all this is to force the Russians to the negotiating table?
Yeah, indeed, to make it costly for Vladimir Putin, no one is under the illusion at this point, 3.5 years into the war, that Putin will all of a sudden be dissuaded from waging this war. But at the very least, maybe his calculus will change, and that is possibly the reason for this, what I consider a strategic leak. Or an intentional sort of leak in the Axios, to which you refer to, that also quotes, some unnamed source in the White House that apparently Donald Trump asked Vladimir Zelensky if Ukraine could reach Moscow or St. Petersburg with a missile or a drone, something like that. So I suspect that this was not unintentional, and once again, this is part of maybe Donald Trump's attempt to make Vladimir Putin reconsider, because also you have to understand that Donald Trump, by all accounts, as also has been reported just today in the press, remains a believer that Russia has the cards, as he likes to say. Ukraine does not have as many cards. So at bottom, Donald Trump continues to believe that Russia would eventually prevail. And if it did, it would cost him dearly when it comes to his own image as a strong man, as a strong leader, something that Mark Rutte has been encouraging him to think increasingly. He cannot afford to lose face like that.
Marina, the supply of these weapons is not being done in isolation. It's been accompanied by a threat by President Trump to impose secondary sanctions on Russia's main trading partners, those countries perhaps that buy Russian oil. It would be targeting countries like India, like China as well, with 100% tariffs. Is that going to change anything?
Whether it will change anything remains to be seen. We have seen 17 packages of sanctions, which had, well, little effect, perhaps on the Russian economy, given the fact that Russia started adapting its economy. And because Russia is not as globalized as Western countries, that turned out to be a benefit in this specific case. Yes, it has affected some industries, such as microelectronics, dual-use components, but you can get around that. And so I assume, yes, it will have an effect, but whether it will force Russian allies to step away from Russia or force Russia to abandon the war in Ukraine is another question. Is this going to have the desired strategic output? And I doubt it will. But what are the downsides for the United States of introducing those tariffs? So we have to keep that also in consideration, because whatever Trump does, and he has been accused of being pro-Russian and Russian asset and all those things, but what we have to understand when we analyze Trump's behavior, Trump's administration's behavior, specifically because the Rutte divisions within the administration, is that Trump is always acting pro-American and securing American interests first. Whether it's pro-Russia or pro-Ukraine, that's not a question.
Okay, Peter, on the question of using tariffs as part of a broader goal to get Russia to the negotiating table or to inflict some kind of punishment on Russia, the European Union is also working on a sanctions package against Russia that would include a lower price cap on Russian oil. I mean, can they be effective? Because the Europeans continue to buy Russian oil. In fact, there was some research done at the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, which is based in Finland. They pointed out that in April, EU imports of Russian fossil fuels, which is now in the third year of the invasion, surpass all the financial aid that's been given to Ukraine.
Well, obviously, in the context of other countries still happy to buy Russian oil at a pretty good discount. I mean, the usefulness and the effectiveness of sanctions or tariffs remains quite limited. You know, Russia has been able to weather over 6,000 sanctions already placed upon it. It's the most sanctioned country in the world's history. And so what more can be done, especially when we're talking about tariffs from the United States? I mean, the trade volume between U.S. and Russia is already pretty limited. So you have to wonder what those could be. You know, Donald Trump precisely, I think, decided to delay once again those punishing sanctions and tariffs for 50 days because he understands that the backlash, you know, and the side effect of that, if we're talking about India and China, for example, will be quite significant. I'm not sure detrimental, but significant to the U.S. economy. That just, once again, is a banal illustration of how everything is intertwined in this world. And these are very, very, delicate instruments, and you have to really continuously fine-tune them. And finally, I'd like to say that, once again, Russia is spending up to 7% of its national income on military needs right now. And the Europeans, members of NATO, even though they agree on bumping up their expenditures to 5%, only 22 countries are willing and able to do it in the near future. There's a lot of outliers, so Europe is nowhere near to where Russia is spending, and Vladimir Putin continues to be secure in his belief that Russia will outlast Ukraine and its Western allies.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Peter Zalmayev, Marina, Miron, thanks to both of you for being with us. Now, for analysis from Moscow, let's bring in our next panel. Anton Fedyashin is a history professor at American University and a Russian and European affairs analyst. And Mark Sleboda is a Moscow-based international affairs and security analyst. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Mark Sleboda, Russian leaders say they need time to analyze the impact of this latest arms announcement and the threat of secondary sanctions on Russia's trading partners. But what do you make of it? What's the point of it all?
The point of Russia saying they need time is they're looking to see which way the political winds are blowing in Washington, and what the reality of these proposed sanctions, which really aren't sanctions on Russia. It's an attempt to tariff the rest of the world, a tariff war on the rest of the world to try to force the rest of the world to stop trading with Russia. And of course, of what the reality of any new military package being provided to the Kiev regime is. I think the Kremlin is still playing the diplomatic game. Mm-hmm. They don't want to come out too harsh in response to Trump's ultimatums and escalations, but I think they're rapidly losing faith that any diplomatic process with the Trump administration is possible.
Right, and Mark, what do you read into the fact that Trump, in his telephone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine, also talked about whether these weapons could strike Moscow or strike other targets deep inside Russia?
Yes. So, from what my understanding is, the Trump administration has, belatedly denied these claims by the Washington Post. But it really, I don't think it surprises me in the slightest. We saw the previous U.S. administration, the Biden administration, was making long-range ballistic missile attacks into Russia, and I think we can stop with the fig leaf and the pretext that this is the Kiev regime. This would be a Trump administration firing ballistic missiles into Russia. We know that these systems cannot be operated without, very specific U.S. technical personnel to operate the coding software for the weaponry and the satellite guidance required. So I don't think that Russia takes the threats very seriously. Certainly not with the ATACMS. I mean, it was this administration itself who has previously admitted that they provided a very significant number of ATACMS to the Kiev regime to little to no operational effect, because Russia's air defense and electronic warfare shields very quickly adapted and, well, brought them down far more than they were able to penetrate Russia's defenses.
Anton, Fedyashin, what are your thoughts on this announcement by the Trump administration? I mean, where do you see this heading? I mean, it could be about tariffs. It could be about getting Russia to the negotiating table. It could be changing the military situation on the ground. Where do you see it?
Well, it's not going to change the military situation on the ground, because pretty much all the weapons that the West has have been sent over to Ukraine, including, by the way, long-range missiles. And they haven't really changed the reality on the ground. And the reality of the ground, Anand, is that the Russians are remorselessly taking Ukrainian villages and moving further and further into Ukrainian territory. And it doesn't look like there's really anything that the Ukrainians can do. But I think that in talking about the weeds of this question, which, by the way, remain very unclear, because we've heard about Patriot batteries, and it looks like there may be 3 coming, but when they're going to arrive there is unclear. How many missiles are they going to have each? Because a Patriot battle without the missiles is pretty pointless. All of that, I guess, we'll be finding out over the next weeks. But for me, what's interesting is that for all of the breathless commentary that we're hearing from the West, and of course from Ukraine, understandably, about Trump's seeming about-face, to me, it looks like the Trump administration is simply extricating itself from direct involvement in the Ukraine war. Because when you think about the broad terms of what just happened within the past 48 hours, the Trump administration has basically said the Europeans are now taking over. We will only provide weapons they pay for. And from now on, it's the Ukrainians and the Europeans,
right,
and go to deal with the Russians.
Yeah, Anton, I want to get very quickly to the efforts being made to resolve this diplomatically. There has been much progress in the talks that have been taking place in Turkey. But there are memorandums which are being circulated between both sides. But President Trump, for his part, blames Russia for the stall in negotiations. Let's listen to what the president had to say.
I've been hearing so much talk. It's all talk. It's all talk, and then missiles go into Kiev and kill 60 people. It's got to stop. That's got to stop.
So, Anton, where is the diplomatic process right now?
Well, the diplomatic process is in limbo because the two sides are trying to agree if they're going to get together in Istanbul. The Russians are asking for a meeting right now. It's the Ukrainians that are dragging their feet, as are the Europeans. We've heard publicly on multiple occasions that diplomacy has run its course, both from Ukrainian and from Western politicians. So the question is, how long will Ukraine take the military punishment on the field?
Right. Mark Sleboda, President Trump is also threatening secondary tariffs on those countries that trade with Russia, that buy Russian energy, for example, if a ceasefire deal is not reached within 50 days. And the Russians don't seem too concerned about this. Here is the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov.
An unprecedented number of sanctions against us have already been announced, and we are coping. I have no doubt that we will cope with new sanctions. This conclusion is based on an assessment, on the analysis of independent, including many Western economists and politicians.
So, Mark, to what extent will these threats of some more sanctions factor into Russia's response? And there's so many contradictory factors in this. The Europeans, for one, continue to buy Russian energy. The United States itself continues to trade with Russia. It imports uranium, it imports iron and steel, it imports fertilizer as well.
Yeah, I don't think that Russia takes these threats, this bluster very seriously from the Trump administration. They understand that the Trump administration really has no cards, that this is toothless. The Trump administration has threatened in various forms to wage a tariff war on the world. This is a new tariff war. Are they going to launch 100% tariffs on China that they supposedly just reached? A trade deal that we know very little of the details about, but at least according to the Trump administration. Are they going to sanction the India that they have courted geopolitically to try to turn them into another proxy for their eventual war with China in the Pacific? Are they going to sanction Turkey, which buys a great deal of Russian energy, both for their own use and then to repackage and resell it back on to Europe? These aren't credible threats. It would send global energy prices skyrocketing. It would vastly increase inflation and the price at the pump in the U.S. with Donald Trump looking at midterm elections. Russia doesn't take this. If they did manage the political will to pull it through and to try to suffer through the backlash of it, Russia would simply soldier on. China and India have indicated that they have no intention of obeying it, and they would find another work around the sanctions, just as they have the 30,000 other sanctions that the U.S. has impotently thrown at Russia in the last decade.
Anton, we have been talking for months, for years, about this battle. If we look at what's happened in the last few weeks, Russia has launched a barrage of drone attacks on targets in Ukraine. There have been heavy losses on both sides, one should say. So at this stage, what is Russia's objective?
The Russian objective is to bring the West and Ukraine to the negotiating table over the general architecture of European and even more broadly Eurasian security. The two sides are still talking past each other. The Russians are thinking about this more or less philosophically. The Ukrainians and the Western countries supporting them are thinking in terms of the immediate battle in Ukraine, the actual fighting. They want a ceasefire so that they can rearm, regroup the Ukrainian army and potentially allow it to try to reclaim, re-battle some of its territory back. And that's where the sides are talking past each other. And until they actually start sitting down at a table and start reaching a level middle ground, this will simply go on. And the Ukrainians are going to continue to lose their army and lose their territory.
So just to clarify, Anton, this is broadly about changing the entire security architecture in Europe. This is something that President Putin has been talking about for quite some time, hasn't he?
Consistently, no one who's actually been listening to the Russians, and it wasn't just Putin when he was president, but also President Dmitry Medvedev, they've all been saying this for over a decade now, which is the NATO-Russia relationship and then the broader Eurasian security relationship needs to be rethought, recalibrated, and renegotiated with all of the partners having a say.
Yeah, Mark Sleboda, Trump made this announcement in the Oval Office at the White House in the presence of the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. How significant is that? Is there a message in there that this is a battle between Ukraine and NATO? It's not a battle between Russia and NATO, not just Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, well, the Trump administration has continued at least until the last week to try to present itself as some type of third-party mediator in this since Trump took office. Of course, that's not true. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio himself admitted that this was largely a U.S. proxy war on Russia in Ukraine. So the fact that Trump is announcing this with the NATO Secretary General certainly doesn't faze anyone in Russia. They've long understood. Maybe Americans have not understood the nature of this conflict. But I mean, part of it is they're attempting to drop this pretense that the U.S. is going to continue to provide weapons to the conflict laundered through NATO. The Europeans will be paying for it. Well, I mean, actually, it's NATO is going to be paying for it. And the U.S. is actually still the largest single contributor to the budget of NATO. So I think this is primarily for domestic political affairs. The Trump administration is trying a sleight of hand to convince Trump's own revolting MAGA base that what he's doing is not really what he's doing. It doesn't seem that it's having that much of an effect, though.
Anton, the Europeans are also threatening oil sanctions against Russia, and I'm wondering how much credibility that has, because the Europeans continue to buy Russian oil, and at this current time, you know, I mean, we have the IMF, which has just told us that European Union economic growth for 2025 is going to be less than 1%. Can they afford sanctions at this stage?
No, they can't afford sanctions, Anton, because the Russian economy, even though its growth is projected to slow down this year and next year, is still going to grow at a higher rate than the European economies have, which is absolutely incredible. The Europeans can afford it, but what the European elite can afford even less is to admit to its own population, which has already figured it out for the most part, that they were wrong about their gamble with the Ukraine project, dragging it into NATO, and then fighting a proxy war with Russia through Ukraine. But of course, politicians never admit that they are wrong. They have no reverse gear. So the 18th package, which Slovakia just stalled today, is probably going to pass. And there are already European foreign ministers who are talking about a 19th one. And since the first 17 haven't worked, I'm not putting much money on the 18th and the 19th actually achieving what they set out to do.
Okay, Anton, Fedyashin, Mark Sleboda, thanks to both of you for being with us. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington.